Hey everyone, in this week's episode of Ask the Editor, we're going to talk through the organization of our project files as it relates to the implementation of revisions. So for us, having a team-based approach, it's really important that all of our project files are basically organized the same way so that if any team member needs to hop into a project that they didn't edit the first cut of, they know exactly how to navigate the project file, how to find the shots that are being requested, how to even look at the revisions that are being requested from clients. And we all strive to do this quickly, easily, and accurately so that clients are getting back films that are accurate to their style, to their brand, and to the changes that they requested. We like to use an application called Frame.io, and there's some great integration with Premiere. And this is super helpful to have revisions communicated to us from the client. And like I said, ideally the same editor that created the first cut would implement the revisions. But as we all know, life happens. So sometimes we've had people go out of town, editors get sick, or get called on to another project. So it's important that we have these systems in place so that any editor can hop in the seat, know exactly what they're looking at, and find their shots quickly and easily. So let's take a look at the organization of our project file through the revision process. Okay, so now that we've got Premiere open, you can see on our timeline we've got the first draft of our film here. We're going to go ahead and duplicate this by right-clicking in the project panel, going up to Duplicate, and we're going to rename it to take off the copy and add the number 2 in front of the sequence name, just so that we can keep it separate from our first draft. And we're going to go ahead and keep the first draft of this film intact, just in case we ever have to go back and rework a section to a way that we had it originally. We don't lose any of the work that's been done so far. You'll notice here that we keep this in a draft sub-bin in our sequence bin, and this is distinctly different from this bin up here called finals. The only sequences that should be in our finals bin are those that are truly final and completely approved by the client. This is really important for us because we have a team, just to ensure that our colorist and audio engineer aren't coloring and mixing a draft of a film as opposed to a final version of a film. For color, it's not as big of a deal because they can copy and paste the attributes of their color. But because of our mixing workflow and creating stems and working in Logic, it's really important that Dan is mixing the final version of a film as opposed to a draft. So we really want to make sure to maintain the difference between finals and drafts. So for this video, we're going to be focusing exclusively on a draft, since we are implementing revisions that are going to then go back to a client. So we're going to go ahead and open up this sequence that we just put the number 2 in front of. And if you notice up here, we've got a Frame.io integration into Premiere. This is really great because you can actually have your playhead tie from your sequence to the Frame.io comments that you received from a client. So we'll go ahead and navigate to the folder in this Frame.io window of the film that we're working on and double click the film. And if you notice right here, we've got this little link playheads button. If you press that, it'll actually match the playhead on your timeline to the playhead in this Frame.io extension window. And now when you go and you click through the comments, it'll jump your playhead on the timeline to that comment. That way you know that you're making the right revision to the exact clip that's being referenced on Frame.io. Okay, so we're going to focus on this comment here that is requesting a couple shots of the dress be added after this shot right here. Based on our bin and sequence structure in the project panel, I can pretty quickly figure out where to navigate to find this shot. So within our sequences bin, I can see that I've got these 2 day bins, and I know that the requested footage is going to live in the wedding day since it's of the dress. We've got this broken down into 3 time of day bins. So based on the footage being requested, I'm going to guess that it's also within the pre-ceremony bin and bride prep estabs. So now I'm going to navigate over to our markers panel, and I can see that the editor has this divided between 4 sections of gifts, letter, dress, and shoes. This is a process that we call chunking the footage. So after a project is synced and culled and organized and multi-cammed and all that good stuff, the creative editor who gets the project second will actually go through and do a finer comb through of the footage, bringing together different shooters' angles of the same content. So here I've got this chunk that's labeled dress, and I can see pretty clearly the clips that the editor was pulling up that he was considering integrating into the film versus these ones that are marked purple that actually got included in the film. If I ever want to check which shots actually made it into the film, just in case the editor wasn't keeping up with the labeling, if I go to this wrench up here, I can turn on duplicate frame markers and then navigate back to my film sequence, copy and paste that section of the footage back into this rough cut sequence. And if you see these little colored lines that appear at the bottom of the clips, that means that that shot was used in the final film sequence. Basically, duplicate frame markers is showing that there are two instances of the exact same footage on one timeline. So if I've got any that he included that but didn't mark purple, I can go ahead and highlight those, go to label, and I'll just put that as violet. And that visual cue will help disrupt the eye line so that way you know that that footage has been used. So if the client is requesting additional shots, you know not to go to those colored clips because they've already been worked into the film. You'll notice between the markers, we've got these bigger chunks on the timeline, but within each of these sections of chunked footage, we've got these smaller gaps on the timeline. That's going to indicate a separation between two different shooters of the same content. So that way you can more quickly identify complementary shots that can be sequenced together. Now, if a section of a clip is requested that didn't actually make it onto the cold timeline of footage, we can actually go back to our footage bin, and if we open up one of these cards of footage, you'll see that the description column has got some text entered occasionally throughout it. Our editors will go through and update this column while they're culling and organizing the footage anytime the content changes. So you'll see here that from clip 1 to 5, we've got beach stabs. 6 and 7 are of venue stabs. There's one shot of ceremony rehearsal, and then clips 9 all the way to 22 are all establishing shots of the venue. So that way, if footage is being requested that isn't on the cold sequence, I can go back to these descriptions in the project panel and at least narrow down the field of search to see if that footage even exists. So I didn't get this request on this film, but let's say that the client had requested to change angles of the same content. Based on the way that our timeline tracks are organized, this is actually a really easy change for us to make. So you'll notice here that we've got two angles of our A-roll, and let's say that instead of this reaction shot, we wanted to show the speaker instead. We could just go ahead and enable the clip that's on top, and there we go, that revision is done. You just want to make sure that if you're implementing revisions of this kind, that you're avoiding jump cuts. So you may have to cut to a reaction shot that otherwise had been a shot of the speaker before. The same can be said about our audio sources. If we had some noise that appeared all of a sudden or some interference or something like that, we've actually got our backup source right below here. So we can go ahead and just swap between the two. You're just probably going to want to make sure that you implement changes like this in a bigger sense than just the moment that's being requested, since you may detect a shift in the audio source and that would sound a little odd during playback. And if you're getting some slow performance from your machine during playback by having all these clips enabled on the timeline simultaneously, you can go ahead and disable the ones that are below other shots. And then that way Premiere is only trying to read one video at a time. All right, once we've worked through all the revisions, we'll go ahead and export our updated cut, throw it back on Frame.io, wait for revisions to come in from the client or the green light to move ahead to color mix, and either repeat the process or call it picture lock, move the sequence into the finals bin, hand it off to the colorist and audio mixer, and move on to the next phase of the process. A workflow like this is super helpful for filmmakers, even if you aren't working with an editor outside of yourself. Sometimes some time can pass between when you create a cut and when you get revisions from your own client. So this is a process that will really help you get right back into the mindset of where you were at when you left the project. And then you're not reinventing the wheel with every new project that you work on. You kind of have a system in place so that way, no matter what project you're working on, you can jump right back into it and know exactly what you're looking at. Thanks for watching. I hope that this insight into our revision process has been helpful for you. Keep submitting your questions to either ask@archaiscreative.com or check out the website link in the caption below, and happy editing.